I think that one of the things that is unusual, original, and that critical in your book, visionary, is the linking or the thinking about what's happening to the environment, what's happening to the planet, the risks that we are now facing. The words existential, the idea of existential risk is really quite new. I think there are many people within society for whom it's a new term, and one that for me only in the last 4 or 5 years have I been thinking about. And so you're talking in this book about the role of progressive education in preparing children to live in the time of existential risk.
Mm-hmm.
I have this quote again from Matt Damon. It's my last quote from him. I hope that he will be forgiving of my over-quoting. He says, "I am concerned about our planet and the existential threats Steve identifies: climate change, nuclear threat, terrorism, social and economic injustice." Can you talk a little bit about the concept of existential risk and then your ideas about why progressive education is so important in a time of existential risk?
Since that's the title of my book, I better be able to talk about it a bit. I'm going to start just by observing that existential, as the root word of existentialism, was always sort of an arcane philosophical notion or literary notion. And while it is clearly related to semantically and otherwise, existential risk is somewhat of a different thing. So it's a different application of an idea. And as you know, as any thoughtful human should know, existential risk means we're screwing with our very existence. So this is not a trivial or philosophical notion anymore. It has to do with the survival of the planet and of the human species. I shouldn't limit that to human species. We've already done a pretty good job of eliminating lots of other species, and we should be ashamed of that. But the notion of progressive education as an antidote to that is important in a couple of ways. And it also relates to what I've already said about education reform. Traditional education, or as I call it in my book, conventional education, because traditional is much too dignified a term for it, traditional education has always been about compliance and conformity. So children are essentially taught something. I don't want to get too dogmatic, but I think that some of the risks of conformity and compliance can also be seen in rigid religious training and a number of other ways where children are socialized to believe something without having a chance to construct their own belief or even understand it. So that conflict has always been implicit in debates about education. I don't think children should be trained or learn to be compliant or to conform to anything. I think that they should be questioning authority. I think they should be nonconformist, and I think they should be learning to develop their own point of view based on what they know about the world around them. That's a very important distinction between progressive and conventional education. More than that, part of the mission of any progressive school that's worth its salt, from the beginning, even before, but most notably espoused by John Dewey and others, is that education is the lifeblood of democracy. And that, therefore, as I write in my book, children must, in schools, have a chance to live democracy, not be instructed it in a civics class, but to live democratically, to have a voice in their own education, to take intellectual and social risks, to become a fully thoughtful, alive human being. And now in this era, the reason that that's inarguably more important than it used to be, as education is falling under the control of enormously powerful oligarchs, as our mutual friend Anthony Cody has addressed so well in his book, that the people who have control over education are the ones who are presenting the greatest risk to our ongoing existence. When I, again, as I wrote in the book, and I guess it's okay to be self-referential since we're talking about my book, it's reasonable to ask, what is the motivation of the people who are the money behind education reform and current policy? And I mean this not only in charter schools, but I mean this in terms of public education. Anyone who doesn't think that Arne Duncan, as the Secretary of Education, or now John King, who succeeded them, anyone who doesn't think that those people are beholden to Gates and others, again, is living in la-la land. So we're now at a point that's unprecedented in our history, where the nature and the content of the education being provided to our kids is being controlled by people who have a vested interest and are not looking at social justice, in not looking at economic injustice, at not addressing issues of racism. It's in their best interest not to do that. I ask in the book for any reader to make a decision for themselves. Do you think that the Walton family, the wealthiest people on the planet virtually, are more interested in developing skeptical citizens or good workers? I don't know anyone in the Walton family, but I think the answer to that question is self-evident. I'm slightly more ambivalent about Bill Gates, who we spoke of before. I think he just doesn't know any better. I don't know that he's intending in any way to profit from his effect on educational policy, but I think he's doing a significant amount of harm anyway.
The move towards technology within schools, the idea that, I think that part of it is very much...
I agree with you, except there is a distinction that I don't do to pardon him from the influence that he's having. I don't happen to think, Anthony may, other people may, that it's kind of a sideways way of self-promotion where he's hoping by praising the use of technology in schools that he'll sell more Microsoft licenses. I honestly don't think that he is trying to figure out how he can be richer.
But the galvanic devices that he's using and the idea of being able to, which is in schools, I think that perhaps there's more to it than we...
I think there probably is more to it than we think, but I think that the real thing for many of the people who are enthusiastic about technology in schools is, one, I think, inherently self-serving for people who are selling online programming. And, I get a dozen emails a day with somebody who has some crappy, metrics-based data assessment, helicopter hovering over children stuff. It's happening all over the place. But part of that also comes from a very fundamental misunderstanding about how human beings learn. And I think Bill Gates and others, because it's their life, think technology can do anything. So it's just right de facto without any deeper analysis. I often argue that life is organic, not electric, that human experience is real, not digital. And, when I see classrooms with kids glued to an iPad or to a computer screen, I shudder. They're missing the things that really create...
What will happen to the children who are in those very controlled skill environments as the planet changes and events take place? And I'm taking you back into existential risk.
Well, there are a lot of things that are the inevitable collateral damage from technology and other things. One of them is that just by inference, children who are spending a lot of time learning through technology are simply learning what somebody else programmed for them to learn, so they're not developing or constructing their own knowledge or sense of the world. It is very difficult to develop a powerful sense of social justice and empathy unless you spend a lot of time kissing your computer, which I don't recommend. biologically, it is unquestionably true that human beings learn best in a social context, engaging with other people.
And solve problems best within those.
Within of course, again, any of us who have looked at that and spent a great deal of time understanding, learning, know that. But it gets back to the central question of what will happen to those children. And a lot of things will happen to them and they're not good. They won't be truly educated. Children who are trained with what looks like the most effective digital stuff won't actually have any of the knowledge and skills to be effective advocates for saving the world. It's just not going to happen. They won't even be particularly good employees because their own education will have been so limited. And here's what really, I think, is probably saddest, and it's reflective of a very deep problem in American culture, not only American culture, but American culture at this time, is that so many people are acting in a way that is grievously against their own self-interest. If you look at the many citizens who will vote in November to possibly, I hope not, elect a candidate who doesn't care a whit about any of them and whose policies will perpetuate or increase economic injustice and social injustice, and yet they have been bamboozled into thinking somehow that supporting this will result in a better life for them. It's been going on for a long time. It's been going on for a number of decades. And the same thing is true in education. I see families who are seduced by the colorful promotions for buy this software, get this computer, have your child learn how to code, sign up for an online learning program. And all of that is drawing them into experiences that are going to disadvantage them and their children. It's a national shame.
Last question. This is for the next president of the United States. We know which one we would like to see there.
Yes.
So if she calls you
Yes.
and asks you what is the most important thing she can do in the short term or in the long term for public education for children, what would you say?
The smart-assed adolescent in me wants to say, make me the Secretary of Education.
I would support that.
And I wouldn't do it because I'm smarter than that. I would ask her, perhaps since I would be talking to her, to allow me to advise her on the composition of a collection of notable thinkers, theoreticians, developmental psychologists, neurobiologists, who could advise her on education and education policy. None of those people, and they're all over the place, you know them and I know them, have had any place at the table in terms of our national policies. If she would heed just that, to get the best minds and the best hearts together to help her design a different approach to education, that would be the best start that I can think of. Right now, the people who are holding the seats at that table are wealthy people and economists, and they don't know shit from Shinola.
It's a wonderful place to start. I just want to thank you, and just to say again, first, Do No Harm, Progressive Education, The Time of Existential Risk, will be published very shortly by Garn Press, and we're really looking forward to having the book out there and people reading it and talking about it, and we think it will make a huge difference. Thank you very much, Steve Nelson.
Thank you, Danny, and Garn Press.